When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, lost in the trees. User, not Kowalski. Posted November 22nd, 1995.
My cousin Tony has been missing for 3 years. The last time I saw him was on August 9th, 1992, during our big road trip to celebrate graduation. The trip was something he and I had been planning ever since we were little kids, and my dad had taken us to see the movie Vanishing Point at the Park Drive-In in Alliance. In it, this crazy guy named Kowalski bets his drug dealer that he can deliver a car from Denver to San Francisco over a weekend, and then all hell breaks loose because he just won't stop. Tony and I were 13 when Dad took us to see that, and a lot of the fine details went over our heads. All we knew was that we wanted to be like Kowalski and drive until we couldn't anymore, meeting girls and having adventures on the way. Our folks weren't wild about the idea, especially given how Kowalski winds up at the end of that picture, but Tony and I eventually convinced them that we weren't planning on following the movie's example that closely. We graduated in June of '92 and left the next weekend in my Accord. Man, we had some fun. We went west through Chicago, Des Moines, Omaha, and a whole bunch of other dots on the map till we got to Denver, which is where the adventure really began. I'd like to keep those memories for myself, so I'm not going to share them here except to offer you some free advice. Never pick up pretty hitchhikers next to a ditch, because there just might be 4 guys with chains hiding out there waiting to tune you up. We managed to get away with some minor damage to the outside of my car and just chalked it up to the cost of freedom out there in the big bad world, but it turned out the cost was a lot higher than that. We made it to San Francisco, which was everything we'd hoped it to be, then down to Los Angeles. LA was way, way dirtier than I expected. So much for Hollywood, but we still had a time. On our last night together, we met these girls, Heather and Kim, who took us to a jazz club on Sunset called The Central. Tony and I knew exactly jack about jazz, but these girls were out of this world, and so we pretended we knew what they were talking about. I don't remember exactly how much we had to drink, but it was enough that when the girls suggested we all go on a hike the next day, we thought it was a good idea to say yes. Tony and I woke up the next morning hungover as hell. We picked Heather and Kim up in some place called Riverside, and they directed us to the Angeles National Forest, having us park at the trailhead for the Gabrielino Trail. Both girls were tall and slim. They'd grown up hiking, and they must have picked up on how completely unused to the woods Tony and I were, because they said they'd picked an easy trail for us. According to the National Park Service, the Gabrielino Trail to Switzer Falls is a moderate 3.7-mile there and back hike that's popular year-round with hikers of all abilities. Everyone I talked to in the days and months that followed Tony's disappearance all said the same thing. There's no way someone can go missing on such a busy trail. And yet, he's gone all the same. It started out fine. We'd had breakfast at a Denny's before picking up the girls, and between the grease and the coffee, we were feeling pretty good. We're not outdoorsy guys, but we're in good enough shape that it wasn't a challenge to keep up, and it turned out that the girls were both pretty funny. Heather's dad was a gaffer in movies, and Kim's parents were both in the industry too. They weren't wealthy, but they still talked differently than working class people back home. Sometimes they'd say something and I'd just nod along like I knew what they were talking about. I could tell Tony was doing the same, but aside from the odd sneaky eye roll, we never got a chance to discuss it. It was around a mile down the trail, I started feeling uncomfortable. At first, it was like someone was watching us, which wasn't impossible as we passed a few people going both directions, but then it got more claustrophobic. I felt like the trees were closing in around us. No one else seemed to notice, so I kept going. Something was up with Tony, too. He started to act spacey, like he wasn't paying attention to what was going on around him. You know what? Distracted. That's what he seemed like. He seemed distracted by something. It's stupid because even though he's been gone for 3 years, I still want to pick up the phone and call him to ask what was going on in his head that day. The worst thing about it is, I never noticed the moment he actually went off the trail. I've racked my brain over and over, but can't nail it down. He was there, and then at some point he wasn't anymore. I remember thinking that he must have stepped off the trail to piss and stop the girls so we wouldn't get too far ahead. Waited 5 minutes, then 10, because I thought maybe his hangover had caught up with him and he was out there blowing chunks, but by minute 15, Heather was asking what the holdup was. Called his name and got nothing. Must have yelled Tony's name 300 times that day, easy. As the morning became afternoon, became evening, I felt a heaviness settle into the pit of my stomach, a certainty. Somehow, I knew that no matter how hard we looked, Tony was not coming back. One of the girls, I forgot which, had a cell phone, called the police. One of the oddest things about that day was that none of the people we spoke to after Tony vanished, be they police or park rangers, seemed all that surprised by his disappearance. As I mentioned before, everyone told me that people couldn't go missing on such a well-traveled trail, but they also didn't press us too hard about the wheres and whys of the whole thing. It really felt like they were just ticking boxes, as if this was something they'd done many times. A search party was organized, but nothing came of it. We never found a single shred of evidence proof Tony had even been there in the first place. I think about Tony every single day, and yet have no clue as to where he could be or what happened to him. Was he kidnapped? He wouldn't have gone without a fight, and we'd have heard something. Did he wander off the trail and get lost? Again, not impossible, but why the hell would he have done that? And if he had, how did no one see or hear him? What is happening out there?
Subject, Red Thyme. User, Cincy Late Night. Posted May 5th, 1997.
Nowadays, a lot of guys my age get up on their high horse about kids watching too much TV, but We all know damn well we grew up doing the same thing. Me, I've always been a night person, and as a kid, that's a damn tough row to hoe because you can't go outside. It makes you a TV kid by default. Mind you, back when I was growing up in Cincinnati in the 60s and 70s, TV stations signed off at midnight, and after that, there wasn't much going on except the radio. Well, that's not entirely right. There was sometimes a show that played after sign-off, but no one else I've spoken to from those days seems to remember it. This isn't a ghost story or whatever, but after my nephew told me about this board, I thought it might be a good place to ask if anyone remembers Red Thyme. Red Thyme was a kids show, but instead of showing in the mornings, it played at night. When I tell people that, they always say it doesn't make sense because kids wouldn't be awake to see it, but I always was. My friend Corey was too, because I remember would talk about it at school sometimes. It was like someone decided to target the very narrow demographic of kids with the neon disease, which is how my mom described my sleeping habits. When the neon signs come on, I wake up. The first time I ever saw the show was on a weekend in either late 73 or early 74. I can say that for sure because that's when Terry Murphy was anchoring the late-night news for WKRC on Saturdays and Sundays. She was only on the station from 73 to 74, and I had a huge crush on her. When she moved to Detroit, she took my little heart with her. Usually, I switched our TV off before the station did their sign-off. Something about the combination of words and music during those final minutes caused a heaviness in my heart, but on this weekend in particular, I was distracted by a commotion outside, the specifics of which are lost to memory. Once I turned my attention back to the TV, the sign-off was over, but instead of static, there was a red curtain on screen. It was a heavy, velvet-looking curtain, and I could hear what sounded like carnival music, but playing slowly, picking up speed the longer it went. We were still almost 10 years away from late-night local cable access TV, but looking back, I have to wonder if this was an early forerunner. That's the only thing that makes sense. When the music reached a speed that bordered on the distorted, I remember there were tiny trumpets followed by a bunch of kids shouting, "It's Red Thyme." Then the curtain pulled up and the camera was pointed at a wooden stage with a black backdrop that looked like it went on forever. Sitting on the stage was a wooden box with a cushion on top and some brightly colored beach balls. There was a popping sound, the picture skipped slightly, and suddenly, sitting on the wooden box was a clown. The first thing I noticed was his size. This guy was Haystack's Calhoun level fat, with the white buttons on his red sweater looked like they were ready to pop off at a moment's notice. The second thing I noticed was his face. It was round and completely smooth like an egg, covered with the usual thick white grease paint, except instead of red markings on his face and around his eyes, it was black. Between the black eye makeup, the black background, and the harsh lighting, you couldn't really see his eyes. It was like you were looking straight through his head to the wall behind him, and I honestly don't remember what kind of pants he was wearing. In fact, I don't think I ever saw him stand up or walk around, and thinking about it now, it was a bizarre look for a children's clown, but I guess that was the 70s. A tile appeared on screen, then in simple red lettering it said, "Bedtime with Red Thyme," and then a theme song played, sung by the same kids' chorus from earlier. I can't remember all of it, but it started with, "It's bedtime with Red Thyme, the moon is way up high. It's bedtime with Red Thyme, won't you let us come inside?" After the song played, the kids' chorus, which you never actually saw, cheered, and then the camera cut into a close-up of the clown, who I eventually learned was Red Thyme. He was cheerful and upbeat, his body language conveying a kind of natural jolliness that immediately put me at ease. After the kids sang, he spoke, and it was the same on every episode I saw. Hey kids, it's me, Red Thyme. Before we start our show tonight, I have a very important question.
Will you allow me and my friends into your home? Yes? That's okay. Yay.
Then he clapped, the sound echoing in the cheap soundstage. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, it all seems a little odd, but there was something about it that compelled you to watch. Every episode played out differently, save for that bit at the beginning and the bit at the end. Red Thyme would sometimes introduce his friends, Spunky the one-eyed dog, Nettles the spider, Mr. Biscuits, each one a different puppet or marionette. Nettles always creeped me out a little bit because they'd dangle him just at the corner of the screen, even on episodes where he didn't talk, and there were nights I could swear he was in the corner of my damn eye, not just the camera. TV was simpler back then, so I suppose we were easier to fool with. I don't specifically remember the things Red Thyme or his friends talked about, but sometimes you felt a kind of vague unease in your tummy, a feeling I later learned was dread. I have this vague memory of Spunky not always being one-eyed, that it happened on the show because of something Mr. Biscuits did, but that can't be right. Just as every episode started the same way, it finished the same way too, with a song. It's Red Thyme's bedtime, a trip we've all been taking. It's Red Thyme's bedtime, the morning sun is waking. It's Red Thyme's bedtime, you better close your eyes. It's Red Thyme's bedtime, or you'll get a big surprise. Then Red Thyme would remind everyone to turn their TV sets off right after the show and go to bed. Then he'd wink, wave goodbye, and the static would come back, at which point I'd turn off the set. I don't know how long that show went for, or even how many episodes I saw, because some nights it would play after sign-off, then some nights it wouldn't. Some nights it even played on a different network entirely, which was unusual. Me and Corey were the only kids at my school who ever saw it, or at least who talked about seeing it, and in the years since, I've yet to find a single other person who caught this show. Does anyone else out there remember Red Thyme?
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.